Child found frozen in blizzard reveals shocking truth about her guardian angel dog. They say guardian angels watch over children, but nobody told Isabella Martinez they might have 4 legs and a German shepherd's courage. On the night that changed everything, as the worst storm in decades buried a small Maine town under 3 feet of snow, a little girl sat dying on a park bench. She'd been there for hours, maybe days, her small body shutting down from hypothermia. But Isabella wasn't alone, not really. In her mind, she was talking to her guardian angel, the one her mama had promised would come when she needed help most. What she didn't know was that an angel was already searching for her. Kaiser, a retired military dog with his own battle scars, was walking with his human Marcus through streets that should have been empty. When Kaiser suddenly stopped and refused to move, when he began that low, urgent whine that Marcus recognized from their war days, neither of them knew they were about to become part of a miracle. The frozen child, the broken soldier, and the dog trained to detect danger were about to discover that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't magic or fate. It's the simple decision to never give up on someone who needs you. Marcus Reed sat in the worn leather armchair by his apartment window, watching the blizzard transform Millbrook into something unrecognizable. The snow fell in thick, angry sheets, each flake catching the amber glow of the streetlight below before disappearing into the growing drifts that had already swallowed the fire escape railings. His dinner, a microwaved burrito and lukewarm coffee, sat untouched on the side table, growing cold like everything else in his life these days. The digital clock on the cable box read 11:47 p.m., but sleep remained as elusive as it had been for the past 18 months. Ever since returning from Afghanistan, Marcus had developed an intimate relationship with insomnia. The pills Dr. Mitchell had prescribed sat in their amber bottle on the nightstand, rattling like tiny promises he couldn't bring himself to keep. He preferred alertness, the way his mind stayed sharp, even when his body screamed for rest. In the war zone, sleep meant vulnerability. Old habits died hard, especially when they'd kept you alive. At his feet, Kaiser shifted position with a soft grunt. The German shepherd's dark sable coat rippled as he moved, revealing the slight favoring of his left hind leg, a souvenir from the same IED explosion that had sent them both home early. The dog's amber eyes reflected the window's light, and Marcus could see the same restless energy that plagued them both. Kaiser had been his partner for 3 years overseas, trained to detect explosives, to protect, to never hesitate. Now they were both learning. From fear, he'd conquered that demon long ago, but from the constant state of hypervigilance that civilian life couldn't quite shake loose from his nervous system. Some nights he'd sit here for hours, cataloging every sound. The building settling, neighbors moving around upstairs, cars passing in the street. Tonight felt different, though. The storm had muffled most of the usual urban symphony, leaving only the howling wind and the soft patter of snow against glass. Kaiser's ears suddenly perked up, swiveling toward the door like radar dishes. The dog's body went rigid, that familiar tension Marcus recognized from their deployment days. Something had caught his attention. Not the storm, not the building's usual groans, but something else entirely. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, his own senses immediately sharpening. Kaiser rose to his feet, padding silently to the front door. His nose worked the air beneath the frame, and a low whine escaped his throat. Not distress, but urgency. The same sound he'd made in Kandahar, when he'd detected something that didn't belong. Marcus pushed himself out of the chair, his joints protesting the sudden movement. At 42, he felt decades older, as if the war had aged him in dog years. He grabbed his heavy winter coat from the hook by the door, the familiar weight of it settling across his shoulders like armor. Kaiser was already at attention, tail rigid, eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "All right, partner," Marcus said, clipping Kaiser's leash to his collar, even though he knew the dog would never stray far from his side. "Let's go walk off the ghosts again." But as he opened the door and felt the brutal wind slice through his layers, Marcus had the strangest feeling that tonight they weren't running from ghosts. They were about to walk straight into one. The town square looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Snow had transformed the familiar landmarks of Marcus's adopted hometown into alien sculptures. The bronze statue of the town's founder was now a white mound with one arm protruding like a desperate wave. The fountain had become a frozen crater, and the wrought iron benches that usually hosted dog walkers and elderly chess players were buried under 2 feet of pristine white. Marcus pulled his scarf higher as Kaiser forged ahead, his powerful shoulders cutting through the drifts with the determination of a dog on a mission. The temperature had to be approaching -15, and the wind chill made it feel even more brutal. No sane person would be out in this weather, which made Marcus question his own mental state as his boots punched through the snow. Partnership. This was protective, concerned, almost gentle. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, scanning the white wasteland for whatever had triggered his partner's response. That's when he saw it, a dark shape huddled on one of the benches, so small and still that his mind initially dismissed it as debris blown by the storm. But Kaiser's intensity told a different story. The German shepherd took a tentative step forward, whining softly, his tail dropping low in a submissive posture Marcus had rarely seen. As they moved closer, the shape resolved into something that made Marcus's blood freeze colder than the wind around them. A child, a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old, sat curled on the bench in a thin pink dress that belonged to spring afternoons, not winter nights. Her dark hair was plastered to her head with half-frozen moisture, and her small legs dangled from the bench like a broken doll's. But it was what she held that stopped Marcus in his tracks. Clutched against her chest, like a lifeline, was a red canvas bag, her small arms wrapped around it so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Her lips were moving in a barely audible whisper, as if she were having a conversation with someone only she could see. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed, dropping to one knee in the snow despite the cold that immediately soaked through his jeans. "Hey there, sweetheart. Can you hear me?" The little girl's eyes fluttered open, brilliant blue like chips of summer sky in the winter wasteland. For a moment they focused on Marcus with an intensity that seemed far too old for her face. Then her gaze shifted to Kaiser, who had lowered himself to the ground and was slowly crawling forward on his belly, making himself as non-threatening as possible. "Mama said angels don't wear uniforms," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "But maybe dogs do." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child, hypothermic, abandoned, probably dying, was still looking for hope in the form of divine intervention. And somehow, his broken-down war dog had led him to her in the middle of the worst storm Millbrook had seen in decades. Kaiser had reached the bench and was now pressing his warm body against the girl's legs, sharing his heat without being asked. The dog's instincts, honed by years of protecting soldiers, had immediately recognized someone who needed protection more than anyone he'd ever served. "What's your name, honey?" Marcus asked, shrugging out of his coat despite the immediate bite of cold. Isabella, she whispered, never loosening her grip on the red bag. My mama, she said someone kind would come. She said to wait for someone kind. Marcus wrapped his coat around her tiny frame, and she felt impossibly light, as if the cold had already begun stealing her substance. I'm Marcus, and this is Kaiser. We're going to interaction. But as Marcus lifted her from the bench, cradling her against his chest, she managed one more whisper that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The red bag has my whole life in it. Please don't let them take my whole life. Marcus's truck felt like a sanctuary as he cranked the heater to maximum and positioned Isabella in the passenger seat, his coat still wrapped around her like a cocoon. Kaiser had jumped into the back seat without being asked, positioning himself so his head could rest on the girl's shoulder, sharing warmth and comfort with the instinct of a creature born to serve. The drive to Millbrook General should have taken 10 minutes on a normal night. In the blizzard, with visibility near zero, and the roads barely passable, it became a white-knuckled journey through a frozen hell. Marcus found himself talking to Isabella, keeping her conscious through sheer force of will and conversation. You know, Kaiser here used to be a soldier, just like me, he said, taking the corner onto Main Street at a crawl. He's really good at taking care of people who need help. That's his job. Isabella's eyes had closed, but her breathing remained steady, and her grip on the red bag never loosened. Every few seconds, her lips would move in that same silent conversation, as if she were receiving instructions from an invisible guardian. We're almost there, sweetheart, Marcus continued, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. There are going to be doctors and nurses who specialize in helping little girls get warm and safe. But Kaiser and we're not going anywhere. We'll stay right with you. The emergency room entrance blazed with light that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the storm. Marcus pulled up to the doors and laid on his horn, the sound cutting through the wind like a battle cry. Within seconds, medical personnel were rushing out with a gurney, their scrubs a shocking splash of color against the white chaos. 4-year-old female, severe hypothermia, Marcus called out as he transferred Isabella to the stretcher. Found her in the town square, been out there at least an hour, maybe more. Isabella's eyes snapped open as strangers began touching her, checking vitals, asking questions. For the first time since he'd found her, she showed real fear, struggling against the medical team's hands. "The bag," she cried, her voice stronger than it had been. "Don't let them take the bag." A nurse reached for the red canvas, and Isabella's reaction was immediate agreement. "The bag stays with her. Whatever helps her feel safe right now is what we do." As they wheeled Isabella through the automatic doors, Marcus caught her eye one more time. She was disappearing into the bright, sterile world of medical intervention, but her gaze remained locked on his face with an intensity that felt like a promise being made. "I'll be right here," he called after her. "Kaiser and I will be right here." The doors closed with a hydraulic whisper, leaving Marcus and Kaiser standing in the falling snow outside the emergency room. The German shepherd pressed against his leg, both of them watching the blurred figures moving behind frosted glass windows. Somewhere in that building, A little girl was fighting for her life while clutching a red bag that apparently contained everything she had left in the world. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Mitchell's number, knowing his old army buddy would still be awake, probably dealing with his own insomnia demons. As the phone rang, he realized that everything had changed in the span of 30 minutes. He'd walked into that storm as a broken veteran trying to outrun his ghosts. Now he was responsible for a child whose own ghosts might be far more dangerous than anything he'd faced in Afghanistan. The phone clicked as Mitchell answered, and Marcus took a deep breath of the frigid air. "Jim," he said, "I need you to get to the hospital. I think I just found someone who needs us more than we've ever been needed." Behind him, the storm continued to rage, but Marcus Reed no longer felt cold. The pediatric ward of Millbrook General Hospital hummed with the quiet efficiency of a place designed to heal small bodies and, when possible, wounded spirits. At 2:30 a.m., the fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief. The pale green walls, the cartoon character decorations that seemed cheerful by day but oddly sinister in the middle of the night, and the small figure lying in bed 3 of the children's recovery room. Isabella had been transformed by medical intervention. Her blue-tinged skin now glowed with healthy pink warmth. IV fluids had restored some of the vitality that hypothermia had stolen, and heated blankets cocooned her small frame in layers of institutional comfort. But the red bag remained pressed against her chest like a talisman, her arms wrapped around it even in her medicated drowse. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had seen her share of children in crisis during her 8 years as a pediatric specialist. At 38, she'd learned to compartmentalize the heartbreak that came with her profession, to focus on the medical necessities while social workers and psychologists dealt with the emotional wreckage. But something about this particular case had gotten under her tantrum, but the desperate keening of someone who'd already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose the last piece of her world. Dr. Rodriguez had made the call to leave the bag alone. Medical protocol be damned. Sometimes healing required more than medications and warm blankets. Kaiser lay on the floor beside Isabella's bed, his large frame curled in a protective crescent. Hospital policy typically prohibited animals in patient rooms, but the German shepherd's obvious training and the child's immediate attachment to him had earned him a temporary exception. The charge nurse, Mrs. Patterson, had been in pediatrics for 26 years and had learned to recognize therapeutic value when she saw it. The dog wasn't just a pet, he was medicine. Every time Isabella stirred, Kaiser's head would lift, his amber eyes tracking her movements with the intensity of a guardian angel. When her breathing changed, his ears would perk. When she whimpered in her sleep, he would shift closer, his warm presence a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in this sterile, strange place. Marcus had claimed the uncomfortable visitor's chair in the corner, though he'd barely sat down since they'd arrived. He paced like a caged animal, his military bearing at odds with the child-friendly environment. Dr. Rodriguez had watched him during the initial examination, noting how he'd positioned himself where Isabella could see him, how his jaw had tightened when they'd had to remove her hypothermia-soaked dress, how his hands had clenched into fists when the lab technician had struggled to find a vein for blood work. This wasn't just good Samaritan concern. This was personal. "Her core temperature is back to normal," Dr. Rodriguez said softly, approaching Marcus during one of his pacing circuits. "No frostbite, though her fingers and toes will be sensitive for a few days. Dehydration is responding well to IV therapy. Physically, she's going to be fine." Marcus nodded, but didn't stop moving. "What about the rest of it?" The rest of it is above my pay grade, the doctor admitted. But I've called in a consultant, someone who might be able to help with the other concerns. As if summoned by her words, the door opened with a soft whisper, and Marcus froze mid-stride. The man who entered moved with a familiar hitch in his gait, leaning slightly on a walking cane that had clearly seen better days. Dr. James Mitchell looked older than his 45 years, his dark hair streaked with premature silver, his face bearing the kind of lines that came from seeing too much pain and carrying too much responsibility. But his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that had once helped Marcus navigate the psychological minefields of combat, were exactly the same. "Still bad at sleeping, huh?" Dr. Mitchell said, his voice carrying the easy familiarity of someone who'd shared foxholes and bad MREs, and the kind of conversations that happened at 3 a.m. when the morning falling. The two men stared at each other across the dimly lit hospital room, 18 months of separation collapsing into a moment of recognition that carried the weight of shared trauma and brotherhood forged in the crucible of war. Dr. James Mitchell set his cane against the wall and extended his hand. But Marcus bypassed the formal gesture and pulled his old friend into a brief, fierce embrace. "Jesus, Jim," Marcus whispered. "I didn't know you were working here." "Part-time consulting," Mitchell replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Figured a small-town hospital might need someone who understands complicated cases." His gaze shifted to Isabella, still sleeping peacefully, with the red bag clutched against her chest. "Though I didn't expect to run into an old ghost tonight." They'd served together for 2 tours, Marcus as a military police officer and Mitchell as a combat psychologist attached to their forward operating base. They'd been in the same Humvee on March 15, 2022, when the IED had changed everything. Marcus still carried shrapnel in his left shoulder. Mitchell had lost his leg below the knee and spent 8 months learning to walk again. "You look like hell," Mitchell observed with the brutal honesty that had always characterized their friendship. "Feel worse," Marcus admitted. "But tonight, I don't know, Jim. Finding her out there, it felt like maybe there was a reason you've been sleepwalking through the last year and a half." Marcus nodded, unable to articulate the sense of purpose that had crystallized the moment he'd wrapped his coat around Isabella's shivering form. She was just sitting out there in the storm, clutching that bag like it contained her soul. And when she looked at me, Christ, Jim, it was like she was looking right through me, seeing something I'd forgotten was there. Mitchell pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, a habit from their army days when he'd had to document every psychological evaluation, every session with soldiers on the edge of breaking. "Tell me about the bag." "She won't let go of it. Screamed bloody murder when the nurse tried to take it for inventory, said it contains her whole life." "Trauma response," Mitchell murmured, making notes. "Attachment to objects is common in children who've experienced significant loss. The bag represents security, continuity, control over her environment." He looked up. "What do you know about her circumstances?" "Next to nothing. She said her name is Isabella, mentioned her mama, but that's it. No ID, no family contacts, no indication of how she ended up alone in a blizzard." Mitchell approached Isabella's bedside, moving with the careful grace of someone who'd learned to navigate the world with mechanical assistance. Kaiser lifted his head, assessing the newcomer with intelligent eyes, but didn't move from his protective position. "May I?" Mitchell asked, gesturing toward the bed. Marcus nodded, and they both watched. Psychiatrist began his gentle evaluation. He didn't touch Isabella, didn't try to wake her, just observed. Her breathing patterns, the way she held the bag, the slight furrow in her brow even in sleep. "Selective mutism is possible," he said quietly. "Could be temporary shock or deeper psychological protection. The object attachment is significant. That bag isn't just personal belongings, it's her anchor to identity, to family. to whatever life she had before tonight. So what do we do? Mitchell straightened, his expression serious. We give her time. We give her safety. And we prepare for the possibility that her story is going to be complicated. He paused, studying Marcus's face. The question is, are you prepared for complicated? Because looking at you right now, I see something I haven't seen since before Kandahar. What's that? Purpose. You've been drifting since we got back, going through the motions of being alive, but tonight, you look like someone who remembers why survival matters. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't a permanent part of his anatomy. Maybe I needed to save someone else before I could save myself. Maybe you did, but Marcus. Mitchell's voice carried a warning. If this child has been abandoned, if there's been abuse or trafficking or worse, the road ahead isn't going to be simple. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to be what she needs, not just tonight, but for however long it takes? Before Marcus could answer, Isabella stirred, her blue eyes fluttering open in the dim room. She looked first at Kaiser, reassuring herself of his presence, then at Marcus. When she saw Mitchell, she tensed, her grip on the red bag tightening. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marcus said softly, moving to where she could see him clearly. "This is Dr. Mitchell. He's a friend of mine, and he helps children who have scary things happen to them." Isabella studied Mitchell with the solemn intensity of a child who'd learned to read danger in adult faces. After a long moment, she whispered, "Are you going to try to take my bag too?" "No," Mitchell replied gently. "I think your bag is very important to you. Would you like to tell me about it?" Instead of answering, Isabella slowly unzipped one corner of the red canvas. Her small hand disappeared inside, and when it emerged, she was holding a battered teddy bear with one missing eye and a carefully mended seam across its belly. She hugged it close, then looked directly at Marcus. "His name is Protector," she whispered. "Mama gave him to me when the scary man started coming around." The hospital room fell into a silence so profound that the only sounds were the soft beeping of medical equipment and Kaiser's steady breathing. Isabella clutched the teddy bear against her chest, her blue eyes moving between Marcus and Dr. Mitchell, as if trying to decide whether these strangers could be trusted with the most precious parts of her world. Marcus felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. This child, this tiny warrior who'd survived God knows what before ending up alone in a blizzard, was choosing to share her most sacred possessions with him. The weight of that trust settled over his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility he'd never asked for, but suddenly couldn't imagine refusing. "Protector looks like he's been taking very good care of you," Dr. Mitchell said gently, his trained voice carrying just the right note of interest, without pressure. Isabella nodded solemnly. "Mama said he has magic that keeps the bad dreams away. But sometimes the magic doesn't work when I'm too scared." She reached into the bag again, this time producing a small object wrapped in tissue paper. With careful, deliberate movements, she unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold wedding band, the metal worn smooth by years of wear. The ring looked enormous in her tiny palm, a symbol of love and commitment that seemed heartbreakingly out of place in the sterile hospital room. "This was Mama's," Isabella whispered. "She said when I grow up, I can wear it. And remember that love is the strongest magic of all." Marcus had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to check on Kaiser, but really to compose himself. The simple innocence of the child's words, the way she spoke of her mother in past tense without seeming to fully understand the implications, it was almost too much to bear. When he turned back, Isabella was carefully unwrapping another treasure, a photograph, creased and water-damaged, but still recognizable as a family portrait. A young Latina woman with Isabella's distinctive blue eyes sat in a park somewhere, holding a baby version of Isabella on her lap. Both were smiling, the picture capturing a moment of pure happiness that now felt like an artifact from another world. "That's me and Mama at the lake," Isabella explained, her voice growing stronger as she shared her memories. She said the water was magic too, that it could wash away all the sad things and leave just the happy ones. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward slightly, his clinical training warring with obvious emotion. "Isabella, can you tell me where your mama is now?" The little girl's face clouded, and for a moment, Marcus thought she might retreat back into silence. But instead, she reached into the red bag one more time. This time, producing something that made both men freeze. A small digital recorder, the kind used for voice memos, with scratches and dents that suggested it had been handled frequently. "Mama made this for me," Isabella said, her thumb hovering over the play button. "She said if something happened and I was alone, I should listen to it and remember." She pressed the button, and suddenly the room was filled with a woman's voice, warm, heavily accented with Spanish inflections, but speaking English with the careful precision of someone for whom it was a second language. "It means Mama couldn't stay with you. But I need you to know that you are the bravest, most beautiful girl in the whole world. You are loved, Isabella. More than all the stars in the sky, more than all the fish in the ocean. The red bag has our memories, but you carry our love in your heart always." The voice paused, and they could hear the woman taking a shaky breath before continuing. "Find someone kind, mija. Find someone who looks at you the way Mama looks at you, like you are the most precious thing in the world. And remember, even when I can't hold you, I am holding you in my heart." The recording ended with the soft click of the device turning off, leaving the 3 adults and 1 child in a silence that felt sacred and terrible at the same time. Isabella carefully returned the recorder to the bag, her movements precise and ritualistic. "Mama said the red bag holds our love when we can't hold each other," she whispered, finally looking directly at Marcus. "She said angels would come, but they might not look like the pictures in church books." Marcus found himself kneeling beside the hospital bed, without remembering how he'd gotten there. His hands, which had been shaking with PTSD tremors for months, were suddenly steady as he reached out to gently touch Isabella's small fingers. "Isabella," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to know something. I'm not an angel. I'm just a man who's made a lot of mistakes, but I promise you, I won't let anyone take your red bag. I won't let anyone take your whole life. That's a promise from a soldier." Isabella studied his face for a long moment, then slowly reached out and touched the small scar on his left hand, a souvenir from Kandahar that he'd almost forgotten about. "You have hurt places too," she said simply. "Maybe we can help each other's hurt places get better." Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat softly, and when Marcus looked up, he saw his old friend wiping tears from his eyes with unashamed openness. "I think," Mitchell said quietly, "we're going to need to have a longer conversation about what comes next." The morning sun filtered through the frost-covered windows of Marcus's apartment, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that had seen better days. At 8 a.m., exhaustion clung to him like a second skin, but purpose burned brighter than the fatigue that pulled at his eyelids. He sat hunched over his laptop at the small kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the methodical precision of a man who understood that details could mean the difference between life and death. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, someone putting her there. And the way she'd spoken about her mama in past tense, the careful way she'd handled those precious objects in the bag. This wasn't a case of a lost child. This was something darker. His computer screen displayed multiple browser tabs, Missing children databases, local police reports, social services case files that his old contacts had helped him access. The pattern that was emerging made his stomach churn with a familiar mixture of rage and determination that he hadn't felt since Afghanistan. 7 missing persons reports in the past 2 years, all involving immigrant families, all last seen after contact with various social service agencies that seemed to exist only on paper. Kaiser lay on his favorite spot by the window, but even in rest, the German shepherd's ears remained in constant motion, cataloging every sound in their environment. The dog had been restless since they'd left Isabella at the hospital, as if some protective instinct had been triggered that wouldn't let him fully relax until the child was safe. The sharp, authoritative knock at the door cut through the morning quiet like a blade. 3 precise raps, spaced exactly 2 seconds apart, the kind of knock that belonged to someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. Kaiser's head snapped up, his amber eyes narrowing as a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. The hackles along his neck rose slowly, and he moved into a defensive position that Marcus recognized from their combat days. Marcus closed the laptop quietly and moved toward the door, his bare feet silent on the cold floor. Years of military training had taught him to assess threats before they became critical, and every instinct he possessed was screaming warnings. He looked through the peephole and felt his blood run cold. The man standing in the hallway was tall and imposing, maybe 48, with silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. He wore an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month, and he carried himself with the kind of authority that came from years of manipulating people who couldn't fight back. But it was his eyes that made Marcus's skin crawl. Pale blue, almost colorless, with the flat emptiness of a predator sizing up prey. Marcus opened the door but left the security chain latched, creating a gap just wide enough to speak through. "Can I help you?" The man's smile was practiced perfection, all teeth and no warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. I'm James Alton with Child Protective Services." He held up a leather badge wallet with official-looking credentials. "I understand you were involved in the rescue of a minor last evening. Isabella Quinn?" Every detail about the man screamed deception to Marcus's trained eye. The badge looked real at first glance, but the seal was slightly off-center and the lamination had bubbles around the edges. More telling were the contradictions. Expensive suit but scuffed shoes manicured, hands but dirt under the fingernails, and a nervous tick in his left eye that appeared every few seconds, like a tell in a poker game. "Isabella is safe," Marcus said evenly. "She's receiving medical care at Millbrook General." Of course," the man replied, his rehearsed concern as artificial as his credentials. "I have the utmost respect for your heroic actions, Mr. Reed. However, the child needs proper placement with qualified caregivers. I'm here to facilitate that transition." He produced a clipboard, filled with official-looking documents, holding them up as if paperwork could somehow legitimize his presence. "These are temporary custody transfer forms, standard procedure in cases involving abandoned minors. I'm sure you understand that a single male with no child-rearing experience isn't equipped to handle such a damaged child." The word "damaged" hit Marcus like a physical blow. This stranger was talking about Isabella. Brave, beautiful Isabella, who had shared her most precious memories with him, as if she were broken merchandise, to be processed and discarded. Kaiser must have sensed his rising anger, because the dog moved closer to the door, positioning himself between the hallway and the interior of the apartment like a furry barrier. "I'm not signing anything," Marcus said firmly. "Isabella is under medical care, and any custody decisions will go through proper legal channels." The man's smile never wavered, but something cold and dangerous flickered in those pale eyes. Mr. Reed, I appreciate your protective instincts, but Isabella Quinn needs specialized care for children who have experienced severe trauma. You're not equipped for damaged children. Surely you understand that obstructing official child placement procedures is a serious offense. We wouldn't want any complications to arise from misguided good intentions. The threat was delivered with the same pleasant tone he'd used to discuss paperwork, but Marcus heard it clearly. This wasn't a social worker. This was a predator who had perfected the art of using official authority to prey on vulnerable families. And somehow, he'd already found Isabella. Kaiser's growl deepened, and Marcus could see the dog's muscles tensing, ready to spring into action at the first sign of aggression. The German Shepherd had positioned himself perfectly, close enough to protect, far enough back to avoid being grabbed if the man tried to force his way inside. "I think you should leave now," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded troops in combat zones. "Any legitimate concerns about Isabella's welfare can be addressed through proper channels during business hours." The man
Help her. Marcus felt the familiar surge of combat adrenaline flooding his system, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Are you threatening a child?" "I'm simply explaining reality," the man replied, stepping back from the door. "I'll be back, Mr. Reed, with proper authority. I suggest you prepare Isabella for transition. It would be unfortunate if the process became traumatic for her." As the man walked away, Marcus caught a glimpse of a black SUV waiting at the curb, expensive, with tinted windows and government plates that were probably as fake as everything else about James Alton. He waited until the vehicle disappeared around the corner before closing the door and sliding the deadbolt home. Kaiser remained on high alert, pacing back and forth in front of the door like a sentry. Marcus pulled out his phone and speed-dialed Dr. Mitchell's number. Whatever was happening, whatever Isabella had run from, it had just found them both. 2 hours later, Marcus sat surrounded by printouts, photographs, and case files that painted a picture so disturbing he had to periodically step away from the computer to keep from putting his fist through the wall. What had started as routine background research had evolved into something far more sinister, a systematic network of predation that used the very systems designed to protect children as hunting grounds for human trafficking. The breakthrough had come when he'd cross-referenced Isabella's last name with recent missing persons reports. Rosa Martinez, reported missing 3 months ago, last seen leaving the immigration office in downtown Millbrook after what witnesses described as a consultation with a social services representative. The description of the man matched the silver-haired predator who'd stood at Marcus's door that morning, down to the expensive suit and governmental bearing. But Rosa Martinez was just the beginning. As Marcus dug deeper, using detective skills he'd learned during his years as a military police officer, a horrifying pattern emerged. 7 families in the past 2 years, all immigrants, all struggling with documentation issues, all approached by helpful social workers offering assistance with legal status, housing, and child services. All of them had vanished without a trace after initial contact with agencies that existed only on forged letterhead and fake websites. The man calling himself James Alton was actually Vincent Cross, a former police officer who'd been dismissed from the Millbrook PD 5 years earlier for evidence tampering and corruption. The charges had been dropped on a technicality: missing paperwork, contaminated evidence, witnesses who suddenly couldn't remember crucial details, classic signs of a network that reached deep enough into the system to protect its own. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Mitchell. "I've got information on your visitor," the psychiatrist said without preamble, "and none of it is good. Let me guess, James Alton doesn't exist." Bingo. But Vincent Cross does. And his record reads like a textbook on predatory behavior. Dismissed from police force,
multiple internal affairs investigations, suspected involvement in at least 3 child trafficking cases across state lines. The man's a professional hunter, Marcus. He specializes in targeting vulnerable families, immigrants, single mothers, anyone without strong community ties or legal resources. Marcus felt his jaw clench as the pieces fell into place. He's been using his law enforcement background to create fake credentials, pose as social services, gain access to families who trust authority figures. Gets worse. I've been checking hospital records, and we've had an unusual number of emergency placements through his supposed agency over the past 18 months. Children brought in by various social workers, all with paperwork that looked legitimate, all transferred to specialized facilities within 48 hours. Where are those children now? That's the problem. The facilities don't exist, at least not where the paperwork says they should be. We've been unknowingly processing children into a trafficking network, Marcus. Isabella escaped something that dozens of other kids didn't. The weight of that realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Isabella's terror, her desperate clinging to the red bag, the way she'd spoken about her mama in past tense. She hadn't just been abandoned. She'd witnessed something that had taught her that adults in positions of authority couldn't be trusted, that survival meant staying hidden. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus heard movement from the spare bedroom where Isabella had been napping since they'd returned from the hospital that morning. Kaiser's ears perked up, and he padded softly toward the hallway, his tail wagging gently. The bedroom door opened slowly, and Isabella appeared, clutching the red bag against her chest and rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked smaller in Marcus's oversized t-shirt, which hung on her like a dress, but her blue eyes were alert and focused. "Marcus," she called softly. "I heard angry voices. Was the cold hands man here?" Marcus felt his blood freeze. "What did you call him, sweetheart?" Isabella moved closer, Kaiser immediately positioning himself where she could lean against his warm bulk. "The man with cold hands. That's what Mama called him when she thought I was sleeping. She said his hands were cold because he didn't have a heart like normal people. Isabella, I need you to think very carefully. Did you see this man before last night?" The little girl nodded gravely, her grip on the red bag tightening. "He came to our apartment 3 times. The first time, Mama thought he was nice. He said he could help us with papers, help us stay safe. But after he left, Mama cried. She said his hands were cold when he touched her shoulder. Cold like winter ice." Marcus knelt down so he was at Isabella's eye level, fighting to keep his voice gentle, despite the rage building in his chest. "What happened the other times he came?" "Mama hid me in the closet, but I could hear through the door. He said we had to come with him, that there were people who wanted to help children like me find better homes. But Mama said no, and he got angry. His voice got scary loud, like thunder before lightning." Isabella paused, touching Kaiser's head for comfort before continuing. "The last time, Mama made the recording for my bag. She said if the cold hands man came back, I should run and hide until someone kind found me. She said angels don't always look like angels, but they have warm hands, and they don't lie to children." Dr. Mitchell's voice came through the phone speaker, which Marcus had forgotten was still connected. "Marcus, I'm looking at immigration office security footage from 3 months ago. I think you need to see this. Send it to my email. Isabella, sweetheart, you were very brave to remember all of that. Can you think of anything else about the cold hands man? Anything that might help us keep other children safe?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her small face scrunched in concentration. Then she reached into the red bag and pulled out something Marcus hadn't seen before. A small piece of paper, folded multiple times and worn soft from handling. "Mama wrote this," she said, unfolding it carefully. "It has numbers and words I can't read yet." Marcus took the paper, his hands trembling slightly as he recognized what he was looking at. License plate numbers, addresses, and what appeared to be a coded list of names and locations. Rosa Martinez hadn't just been a victim.
She'd been gathering intelligence on Cross's operation, documenting everything she could in preparation for what? Escape? Confrontation? Going to authorities who might actually listen? His laptop chimed with an incoming email from Dr. Mitchell. The security footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Vincent Cross escorting a young woman out of the immigration building. The woman's face was turned toward the camera for just a moment, and her expression was unmistakable. Pure terror, barely contained panic. The look of someone who realized they'd walked into a trap. "Isabella," Marcus said gently, "is this your mama?" She looked at the screen and nodded, tears beginning to well in her blue eyes. "That's the day she came home crying. That's the day she made my bag and told me about running away." Marcus pulled Isabella into a gentle hug, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. Kaiser pressed closer, creating a warm barrier around both of them. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I promise you're safe." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew that safety was an illusion. Vincent Cross had found them once, and he would come back, Isabella, into the same darkness that had swallowed her mother and countless other children. The war Marcus thought he'd left behind in Afghanistan had followed him home, wearing a different uniform, but carrying the same capacity for evil. This time, though, he had something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. He had a little girl who called him by name and trusted him with her most precious memories. He had a purpose that went deeper than his own healing. He had Isabella, and he would die before letting Vincent Cross take her. The second knock came at precisely 2 p.m., and this time there was nothing polite or official about it. The sound echoed through Marcus's apartment like gunshots, aggressive, demanding, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. Kaiser was on his feet before the first impact faded, every muscle in his body coiled tight as piano wire. A low snarl building in his throat that spoke of barely restrained violence. Marcus had been expecting this. The morning's research had revealed the scope of Vincent Cross's operation, and men like Cross didn't simply walk away when their prey slipped the net. They regrouped, they escalated, and they used every tool at their disposal to reclaim what they considered their property. Isabella was in the spare bedroom, supposedly napping, but actually wide awake, and listening to every sound with the hypervigilance of a child who'd learned that survival meant staying alert. The moment the knocking started, Marcus heard her sharp intake of breath, followed by the soft rustle of movement as she clutched the red bag closer to her chest. Through the peephole, Marcus could see that Cross had brought backup this time. 2 men flanked him in the narrow hallway, muscle by the look of them, with the kind of cold professionalism that spoke of extensive experience in making problems disappear. One was tall and lean, with prison tattoos creeping above his collar. The other was built like a linebacker, his hands scarred from violence that had probably never made it into any official reports. But it was Cross himself who commanded Marcus's attention. Gone was the polished veneer of the morning's performance. His silver hair was slightly disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and there was something wild in those pale eyes that suggested a man pushed beyond his comfort zone. This was Vincent Cross, stripped of pretense, a predator backed into a corner, and ready to lash out with everything he had. "Open the door, Reed," Cross called out, his voice carrying none of the false warmth from earlier. "We need to talk about the girl." Marcus positioned himself, protect. The odds weren't good for a direct confrontation. Kaiser had moved into position without being asked, placing himself squarely between the front door and the rest of the apartment. The German shepherd's training from Afghanistan was asserting itself. He recognized a tactical situation and had automatically assumed his role as both early warning system and last line of defense. His hackles were fully raised now, creating a ridge of bristling fur along his spine, and his lips were pulled back just enough to reveal the gleaming canines that had once helped clear IED sites in Kandahar province. I told you this morning that any legitimate concerns should go through proper channels, Marcus called back, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Business hours, Mr. Cross. The use of his real name had an immediate effect. Cross's face darkened, and he stepped closer to the door, close enough that Marcus could see the fury burning in those colorless eyes. You've been busy, haven't you, Reed? Digging around in things that don't concern you. That's a dangerous habit for someone in your fragile mental state. The threat was clear, but it was also a mistake. Cross was revealing just how much he knew about Marcus's background, which meant he'd done research of his own. But in doing so, he'd also revealed his desperation. Predators like Cross relied on their victims being isolated, frightened, and without resources. A decorated military veteran with combat experience and detective skills didn't fit that profile. From the bedroom came a sound that made Marcus's blood run cold. Isabella's voice, barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the apartment's still air. He's here. The cold hands man is here. The terror in those simple words transformed something fundamental in Marcus's chest. The careful, strategic thinking of a soldier was suddenly overlaid with something more primal, more immediate. This wasn't about law enforcement procedures or proper channels anymore. This was about a 4-year-old girl who had already lost her mother to this monster, and who was now cowering in a bedroom, clutching a red bag that contained all she had left of safety and love. Kaiser must have heard Isabella too, because his snarl deepened into something that sounded less like a dog and more like a wolf preparing for battle. The German shepherd took a step toward the door, his amber eyes fixed on the wooden barrier, as if he could see through it to the threat beyond. "Last chance, Reed," Cross called out. "Open this door, or we'll open it ourselves. The girl comes with us either way." But in the hallway, because suddenly there was movement outside the door. Urgent whispered conversations, the scrape of feet on linoleum, the unmistakable click of weapons being checked. Then Isabella appeared in the hallway behind him, moving like a ghost in his oversized t-shirt, the red bag clutched against her chest with white-knuckled desperation. Her blue eyes were wide with terror, but there was something else there too, a kind of fierce determination that reminded Marcus powerfully of her mother's voice on that recording. "Marcus," she whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. "Don't let him take me. Please don't let the cold hands man take me like he took Mama." The simple plea shattered whatever restraint Marcus had been maintaining. He knelt down and pulled Isabella into his arms, feeling her small body trembling against his chest, while Kaiser pressed close to both of them, creating a barrier of fur and muscle and absolute loyalty. "Nobody's taking you anywhere, sweetheart," he whispered fiercely. "I promise I won't let anyone hurt you." Outside, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the afternoon air
like a cavalry charge. Real police officers, responding to a legitimate emergency call, would be here within minutes. Cross and his men had to know that their window of opportunity was closing fast. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by hurried footsteps and muffled curses. Through the peephole, Marcus watched the three men retreat toward the stairwell, but not before Cross turned back toward the door one last time. "This isn't over, Reed," he called out, his voice carrying a promise of violence that made Isabella whimper and burrow deeper into Marcus's arms. "The girl belongs to us. We always collect what belongs to us." Then they were gone, disappearing into the stairwell just as the first police cruiser pulled up to the building. Marcus remained kneeling on the floor, holding Isabella, while Kaiser maintained his protective stance, until the sound of official voices in the hallway told him that legitimate help had finally arrived. Isabella looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice steady and strong. "He's the one who made Mama cry. He's the one who took her away." Marcus tightened his embrace, feeling something fundamental shift in his understanding of what the next phase of his life would hold. Vincent Cross had made this personal, had threatened a child under Marcus's protection, had revealed the scope of his network and the depth of his desperation. The hunt was on now, but Cross had made a crucial error in judgment. He'd assumed that Marcus Reed was just another obstacle to be intimidated or eliminated. He hadn't counted on facing a man who'd spent 3 tours in Afghanistan, learning how to track and eliminate predators, who used fear as their primary weapon. Isabella was safe in his arms. Kaiser belonged to Vincent Cross. But Marcus intended to make sure it was his last. Dawn broke over Millbrook like a whispered promise, painting the snow-covered streets in shades of amber and rose that seemed almost too beautiful for the darkness they were about to confront. Marcus Reed sat behind the wheel of his pickup truck, the engine idling quietly as warm air circulated through the cab, melting the frost that had gathered on the windows during the night. In the passenger seat, Isabella sat bundled in one of his old military jackets, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, but still hanging past her fingertips. The red bag rested in her lap like a talisman, her small hands wrapped around its straps with the kind of grip that spoke of hard-won wisdom about holding on to what mattered most. Kaiser occupied the back seat, his amber eyes alert and focused as he scanned their surroundings through the rear window. The German shepherd had been restless since before sunrise, pacing the apartment with the kind of contained energy that Marcus recognized from their deployment days. The dog understood, in that mysterious way that military working dogs always seem to understand, that today was different. Today, they were hunting. "Are you sure you're ready for this, sweetheart?" Marcus asked gently, adjusting the rear-view mirror so he could see Isabella's reflection. "We can turn around right now if you're scared." Isabella shook her head with a determination that seemed far too mature for her 4 years. "Mama said being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when your heart is beating too fast." She touched the red bag softly. "My heart is beating fast, but we have to help the other children. Mama would want us to help the other children." The first location on Marcus's list was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the industrial district, flagged in the missing persons reports as the last known address for Maria Santos before she disappeared 8 months ago. As they drove through the early morning streets, Isabella pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she studied the familiar landmarks with the intensity of someone trying to piece together a puzzle from fragments of memory. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a shuttered gas station with broken windows and weeds growing through cracks in the concrete.
Mama and I slept in our car there when we didn't have money for the motel. She said it was just for one night, but it was 3 nights because our car wouldn't start. Marcus pulled into the station's empty lot, noting the strategic advantages it offered. Multiple exit routes, clear sight lines in all directions, and far enough from main traffic that unusual activity wouldn't draw attention. It was exactly the kind of location someone like Vincent Cross would use as a staging area. The warehouse sat like a monument to industrial decay, graffiti that spoke of years of abandonment. But as Marcus parked the truck and helped Isabella down from the cab, he noticed details that told a different story. Fresh tire tracks in the mud beside the loading dock, cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by rain, a padlock on the side door that looked new despite the building's overall deterioration. Kaiser was out of the truck before Marcus could leash him, his nose immediately going to work as he quartered the ground around the building in precise search patterns. The dog's training from Afghanistan was asserting itself. He moved like a professional, systematic and thorough, cataloging scents and following invisible trails that his human companions couldn't detect. Marcus pulled out his phone and began documenting everything. The tire tracks, the fresh padlock, the specific positioning of debris that suggested recent human activity. His police training had taught him that patterns were everything in investigations, that criminals were creatures of habit who left signatures in their behavior whether they realized it or not. Inside the warehouse, shafts of morning sunlight filtered through broken skylights, illuminating a space that had clearly been used as more than just storage. Makeshift sleeping areas had been set up in the corners, thin mattresses, discarded blankets, empty food containers that still held the lingering odors of recent meals. Children's toys lay scattered across the concrete floor, a one-armed doll, a toy truck with missing wheels, a coloring book with pages torn out. Isabella moved through the space with careful steps, her eyes taking in details that an adult might miss. She stopped beside a pile of blankets in the far corner, her face going pale as recognition dawned. "That's Maria's blanket," she whispered, pointing to a faded blue throw with distinctive yellow flowers along the border. "She had it when she came to visit Mama. She said her grandmother made it for her when she was little, that it smelled like home." Marcus knelt beside the blanket, carefully lifting it with the tips of his fingers to avoid contaminating potential evidence. Underneath, he found something that made his stomach clench. A child's sock, pink with white stripes, small enough to belong to a toddler. Kaiser had been working his way systematically through the warehouse, but suddenly his behavior changed. The dog froze near the loading dock, his ears pricked forward and his tail rigid. A low whine escaped his throat. Not distress, but the sound he'd made in Afghanistan when he detected explosives or enemy activity. "What is it, boy?" Marcus called softly. The German shepherd moved toward a section of the concrete floor that looked identical to the rest, but something in the spot where Kaiser had indicated, running his fingers along what appeared to be solid concrete. But as he applied pressure, he realized that what looked like part of the floor was actually a carefully concealed trapdoor, painted and textured to blend seamlessly with the surrounding surface. The space beneath was small, maybe 6 feet square, but it had clearly been used recently. Emergency supplies were stacked against one wall, bottled water, canned food, first aid materials. But it was the other contents that told the real story. Documents in plastic bags, identification papers for multiple families, birth certificates for children ranging in age from infants to teenagers, and photographs that showed the same silver-haired man Marcus now knew as Vincent Cross, posing with various families in what appeared to be official settings. Isabella had followed them to the loading dock, and she gasped when she saw the photographs. "That's him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's the Cold Hands man with other families. Look, there's Maria and her baby." Marcus studied the photograph Isabella had identified. Maria Santos stood beside Cross in what appeared to be an office setting, holding an infant who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Both mother and child looked terrified, but Cross's smile was the same practiced expression of false concern he'd worn at Marcus's door. As they continued searching, the pattern became clear. Cross wasn't working alone, and this wasn't a simple kidnapping operation. The warehouse was one node in a sophisticated network that moved families through a series of locations, keeping them isolated and disoriented, while paperwork was processed and arrangements were made. The scattered toys, the multiple sleeping areas, the careful documentation, it all pointed to an operation that had been running for years, processing dozens of families through a system designed to make them disappear without a trace. Isabella found one more piece of evidence that nearly brought Marcus to his tears. Hidden beneath a pile of discarded clothes was a small wooden cross, hand-carved and painted with bright colors. She picked it up with trembling fingers, holding it like it was made of precious metal. "This belonged to Diego," she said softly, "Maria's little boy. He was scared of the dark, and his papa made this for him before the Cold Hands man came." She looked up at Marcus with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone so young. "Diego was here, Marcus. He was here and he was scared." Marcus pulled Isabella into a gentle hug, feeling the weight of responsibility settling over his shoulders like armor. This wasn't just about protecting one little girl anymore. Somewhere out there, Diego and his baby sister and countless other children were trapped in Cross's network, waiting for someone to care enough to find them. Kaiser padded over to join them, pressing his warm bulk against Isabella's legs in a gesture of comfort that needed no translation. The three of them stood in the abandoned warehouse, as morning light grew stronger through the broken windows, surrounded by evidence of unspeakable cruelty, but united by a shared determination to see justice done. The hunt had begun, and Vincent Cross had no idea what was coming for him. By midday, Marcus's apartment had been transformed into a makeshift command center that would have made his old Army intelligence unit proud. Every available surface was covered with documents, photographs, maps, and printouts that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Vincent Cross's operation. Dr. Mitchell sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, cross-referencing hospital records with missing persons reports, while simultaneously coordinating with contacts in legitimate law enforcement agencies who could be trusted with sensitive information. Isabella had claimed a corner of the living room floor as her workspace, the red bag open beside her as she carefully arranged photographs and helped identify faces and locations from her fragmented memories. Kaiser lay stretched out between her and the front door, positioned where he could monitor both the child's emotional state and any potential threats from the hallway beyond. "The numbers are staggering," Dr. Mitchell said, his voice tight with controlled anger, as he scrolled through data on his screen. "In the past 18 months, Millbrook General has processed 43 emergency placements through various social service agencies. 43 children, Marcus, all transferred to specialized facilities within 72 hours of arrival." Marcus looked up from the map he'd been marking with location pins, each red marker representing a site where evidence of Cross's network had been found. "How many of those facilities actually exist? That's the problem. Officially, they all exist. Perfect paperwork, proper licensing, stellar reviews from families who supposedly received services. But when you dig deeper, when you actually try to visit these places or contact the families, Mitchell shook his head grimly. It's all smoke and mirrors. Shell companies layered on top of shell companies, addresses that lead to empty buildings, phone numbers that route to voicemail systems that never respond. The financial investigation had revealed the true scope of Cross's operation. Payments flowing through a network of offshore accounts, amounts that far exceeded what legitimate adoption services would charge. The numbers suggested something far more sinister than illegal adoptions. They pointed to human trafficking on an international scale, with children being sold to buyers who were willing to pay premium prices for guaranteed discretion. Isabella had been listening to their conversation with the kind of intense focus that children developed when adult words carried implications beyond her years. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I remember more about the cold place now. There were other children there, lots of them. Some spoke Spanish, like me and Mama, but some spoke different words I didn't understand." She reached into the red bag and pulled out a small notebook that Marcus hadn't seen before, its pages filled with a child's careful drawings. "I drew pictures so I wouldn't forget their faces. Mama said forgetting people was like letting them disappear twice." The sketches were crude, but remarkably detailed, showing children of various ages and ethnicities in what appeared to be institutional settings. Some drawings showed bunk beds lined up in rows. Others depicted children sitting at long tables, eating from paper plates. But it was the expressions on the drawn faces that broke Marcus's heart. Universal looks of fear, confusion, and desperate hope. "This boy was named Chen," Isabella said, pointing to a drawing of an Asian child who appeared to be around 7 years old. "He cried at night because he couldn't find his grandmother. And this girl, Elena, she had a baby sister, but they took the sister somewhere else, and Elena got sick from being sad." Dr. Mitchell was taking notes frantically, documenting every detail of Isabella's account. "Isabella, can you remember anything about the adults who worked in this place, besides the cold hands man?" Isabella nodded, flipping through her notebook to find a drawing that showed several adult figures. There was a mean lady with yellow hair who yelled a lot, and a man with tattoos on his arms who talked on the phone in angry voices. But there was also a nice lady, Sophia, who snuck us extra cookies sometimes and told us stories about places where children were safe and happy. The pattern that emerged from Isabella's memories was both heartbreaking and strategically valuable. Cross's operation relied on a combination of legitimate-appearing facilities and complicit staff members who either participated willingly or were coerced into cooperation. The children were processed through a series of locations, their identities gradually erased through forged documents, while buyers were located and arrangements finalized. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text from his contact at the FBI field office in Portland. The message was brief but electrifying. "Cross on move. Multiple locations evacuated last 24 hours. Time sensitive." "He's running," Marcus said, showing the message to Dr. Mitchell. "Cross knows we're getting close, and he's shutting down the operation." Isabella looked up from her drawings, her face pale but determined. "What about compromised? They typically chose to eliminate evidence rather than risk exposure. In Cross's business, the evidence was human." Dr. Mitchell's phone rang, and he answered it with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to emergency consultations. The conversation was brief but intense, conducted in the kind of medical shorthand that excluded civilian understanding. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "That was Detective Sarah Chen from the State Police Task Force on Human Trafficking," he said. "They've been monitoring Cross's known associates, and there's been a spike in activity over the past 12 hours. Phone calls, financial transfers, vehicle movements, all the signs of an operation preparing to disappear." Marcus felt a familiar surge of combat adrenaline flooding his system, the same physiological response that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan. But this time, the enemy wasn't hiding in caves or behind improvised explosive devices. This time, the enemy wore expensive suits and carried forged credentials, and used the very systems designed to protect children as weapons against them. Isabella had been quiet during the adults' conversation, but now she stood up and walked over to Marcus, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible for someone her age, "I have to help save them. I know where some of the places are. I know what the scared sounds mean. I know which adults are mean and which ones might help us." The idea of putting Isabella back in harm's way, of exposing her to the network that had already taken her mother and traumatized her beyond measure, made Marcus feel physically sick. But he also recognized the truth in her words. She possessed intelligence that could be the difference between success and failure, between rescue and tragedy. "Sweetheart," he said gently, kneeling down so they were at eye level, "helping doesn't mean you have to go back to dangerous places. You've already helped so much by telling us what you remember, by showing us the pictures and drawings." Isabella shook her head with the kind of stubborn determination that reminded Marcus powerfully of Rosa Martinez's voice on that recording. "The other children don't have anyone to remember them if they disappear. They don't have red bags with their whole lives inside. They don't have someone like you to keep them safe." She looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that made his chest tight. "Mama said angels come in all different shapes, but they all have the same job: to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." Kaiser had been listening to their conversation with the kind of focus and reached for his coat. "Detective Chen is coordinating a multi-agency response, but they need intelligence about specific locations and operational procedures. The kind of intelligence that only comes from someone who's been inside the system." Marcus looked at Isabella, at her small face, set with determination that belonged on a soldier twice her age, at the red bag that she held like a shield against the darkness of the world. He thought about Diego crying for his grandmother, about Elena getting sick from missing her baby sister, about dozens of children whose names he didn't even know, but whose lives depended on the decisions made in the next few hours. The choice was clear, even if it terrified him. They were moving from defense to offense, from protection to rescue. The hunt for Vincent Cross was about to become a war for the souls of children who had already lost too much. "All right," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made hard decisions in impossible circumstances. "But we do this right. We plan every detail, we coordinate with legitimate law enforcement, and we bring everyone home safe. Everyone." Isabella nodded solemnly, then reached into the red bag and pulled out something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. A small American flag, creased and faded but carefully preserved, that had obviously been carried by someone who understood what it meant to serve something greater than yourself. "This was my daddy's," she said simply.
Mama said he was a soldier too, before I was born. She said soldiers know how to keep people safe. Marcus accepted the flag with hands that trembled slightly, understanding that he was being entrusted with more than just a piece of cloth. He was being asked to live up to an ideal, to become the kind of person who deserved the trust of a 4-year-old girl who had already seen too much darkness. The war for Isabella's future, and the futures of countless other children, was about to begin. As evening settled over Millbrook like a heavy blanket, Marcus's apartment had taken on the atmosphere of a military briefing room. Maps covered every available wall surface, marked with colored pins that represented known locations, suspected safe houses, and potential extraction routes. The kitchen table had been cleared to make room for tactical equipment that Marcus had retrieved from storage containers he'd hoped never to open again. Night vision goggles, communication headsets, body armor that still carried the faint scent of Afghan dust and cordite. Isabella sat cross-legged on the floor beside Kaiser, both of them watching Marcus with a kind of intense focus that spoke of complete trust and shared purpose. The red bag lay open beside her, its contents now supplemented with items that carried new meaning. Marcus's military dog tags, which she'd asked to add for extra protection, a small flashlight that Dr. Mitchell had given her, and the faded American flag that connected her to a father she'd never known, but whose legacy of service now lived in the man preparing to risk everything for her and children like her. Kaiser had undergone his own transformation during the afternoon preparation. The German shepherd responded to Marcus's tactical hand signals with the precision of a machine, muscle memory from Afghanistan asserting itself as if the intervening months of civilian life had been nothing more than an extended leave. When Marcus gave the silent command for search and assess, Kaiser moved through the apartment in methodical patterns, checking corners and exit routes with professional thoroughness. When the signal came for defensive position, the dog immediately placed himself between Isabella and the most vulnerable approach angles, his amber eyes scanning for threats that existed more in preparation than immediate reality. "I've coordinated with Detective Chen and the FBI task force," Dr. Mitchell said, hanging up his phone after another in a series of conversations with law enforcement agencies across 3 states. "They're moving assets into position, but they need our intelligence about specific locations and operational procedures. The window is closing fast. Cross's people have been making calls all afternoon, and the consensus is that they're planning to move remaining assets within the next 12 hours. Marcus nodded, studying the satellite imagery that covered his coffee table like a tactical puzzle. 3 primary locations based on Isabella's memories and the evidence we've gathered. The warehouse complex on Industrial Avenue, the abandoned school building on Riverside Drive, and what appears to be a private residence on the outskirts of town that's been showing unusual activity patterns. Isabella looked up from where she'd been arranging toy soldiers in formation, a game that would have seemed innocent if not for the serious concentration she brought to positioning each figure. "The scary school place has a basement where they kept the older children," she said matter-of-factly. "Sophia told me it used to be a real school, but then bad people started using it for bad things. She said the children there were being prepared for special families who lived far away." The casual way Isabella delivered information that would have devastated most adults was both heartbreaking and strategically valuable. Her 4-year-old perspective had processed trauma in ways that allowed her to function as an intelligence asset while still maintaining the essential innocence that made her worth protecting in the first place. Marcus knelt beside her,
careful to keep his voice gentle despite the military urgency driving his preparations. "Isabella, I need you to understand something very important. Tomorrow, when we go to help the other children, your job isn't to be brave."
Seriously. Then reached into the red bag and pulled out something Marcus hadn't seen before. A small whistle on a braided cord that looked like it had been made by hand. "Mama gave me this for emergencies. She said if I ever got separated from her, I should blow the whistle and remember that someone would always be listening for children who needed help." She carefully hung the whistle around her neck, tucking it inside her shirt, where it wouldn't be visible but could be reached quickly if needed. The gesture was both practical and symbolic. A 4-year-old girl preparing for combat, not with weapons or armor, but with tools that connected her to love and hope and the belief that good people existed in the world. Dr. Mitchell had been monitoring law enforcement communications on a scanner he'd borrowed from the hospital's security department. "Activity spike in the past hour," he reported. "Multiple vehicle movements, unusual radio chatter, and what sounds like evacuation procedures being implemented at several locations simultaneously." The tactical situation was evolving rapidly, but Marcus felt the familiar calm that had carried him through firefights and IED sweeps in Afghanistan. This was what he'd been trained for: high-stakes operations where success depended on preparation, coordination, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment came. The difference was that this time, the mission wasn't about territory or strategic objectives. This time, it was about children who had names and faces and families who were waiting for them to come home. Kaiser had positioned himself near the apartment's main window, maintaining surveillance on the street below, while simultaneously keeping Isabella within his protective perimeter. The dog's behavior had shifted into full tactical mode, ears constantly moving to catalog sounds, nose working to process scent information, body language communicating readiness for immediate action if circumstances required it. As the sun set completely and artificial lights began to illuminate the city beyond Marcus's windows, Isabella announced that she was hungry. The simple, normal request served as a reminder that underneath all the tactical preparation and strategic planning, they were still dealing with a 4-year-old child who needed dinner and bedtime stories and the kind of routine that made traumatized children feel safe. Marcus prepared a simple meal, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup that reminded him of his own childhood, while Isabella set the table with the careful attention to detail that she brought to everything important. Kaiser received his own dinner in a bowl beside Isabella's chair, the German shepherd maintaining his protective posture even while eating. During dinner, Marcus explained the plan in terms that Isabella could understand without being frightened. "Tomorrow, we're going to help the police officers find me and Kaiser the whole time, and there will be lots of good adults whose job is to make sure everyone stays protected." Isabella listened solemnly, occasionally asking questions that revealed her sophisticated understanding of the situation, despite her age. "Will the cold hands man try to hurt the children if he knows we are coming?" she asked, her blue eyes serious in the lamplight. "That's why we're being very careful and working with lots of people who know how to keep children safe," Marcus replied honestly. "Sometimes bad people make bad choices when they're scared, but good people make plans to protect everyone no matter what happens." After dinner, Isabella insisted on adding one more item to the red bag, a photograph that Dr. Mitchell had printed from the hospital's surveillance system, showing Marcus carrying her through the emergency room doors on the night they'd first met. "So I remember that angels really do come when children need help," she explained,
carefully placing the photo among her other treasures. As bedtime approached, Kaiser took up his familiar position beside Isabella's bed, while Marcus checked and rechecked equipment one final time. The apartment felt different now, not like a refuge from the world, but like a staging area for an operation that would determine the fate of innocent lives. Isabella fell asleep quickly, exhaustion from the day's emotional intensity overcoming any anxiety about tomorrow's mission. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, watching her peaceful breathing, while Kaiser maintained his vigil from the floor. Both man and dog understood that tonight might be their last quiet moment for some time, and they guarded it with the reverence of warriors who knew the value of peace. At midnight, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Chen. All units in position. Operation Sanctuary launches at 0600. Children are counting on us. Marcus looked at Isabella, sleeping soundly with the red bag clutched against her chest, at Kaiser's amber eyes reflecting the hallway light, at the tactical equipment that would tomorrow be used in service of justice rather than warfare. Everything was ready. The hunt for Vincent Cross was about to become a rescue mission that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of courage that Marcus Reed possessed. The war for innocence was about to begin, and failure was not an option. The abandoned shipping yard squatted on the outskirts of Millbrook, like a monument to industrial decay, its rusted cranes reaching toward the star-filled sky, like the skeletal fingers of giants long dead. At 3 a.m., with the temperature hovering below freezing and a bitter wind cutting across the empty expanse of cracked concrete, the place felt like the edge of the world, isolated, forgotten, perfect for the kind of business that required absolute secrecy. Marcus Reed, as he studied the layout through military-grade night vision goggles. Beside him, Isabella lay flat against the cold ground, wrapped in his tactical jacket, but still shivering, despite the layers of thermal clothing Dr. Mitchell had procured for the operation. Her blue eyes were wide but focused, taking in details with the kind of hyper-vigilant attention that had kept her alive through months of unimaginable trauma. Kaiser moved like a shadow beside them, his German shepherd instincts honed to perfection by years of combat experience. The dog's nose worked constantly, processing scent information that painted a detailed picture of human activity in ways that electronic surveillance could never match. His ears swiveled like radar dishes, cataloging sounds that were invisible to human perception, but crystal clear to canine senses trained in the crucible of war. The shipping containers had been arranged in a rough triangle, creating a compound that offered both security and concealment. Marcus counted 3 units, massive steel boxes that had once carried legitimate cargo across oceans, but now served purposes that would have horrified their original designers. Makeshift lighting had been strung between the containers, creating pools of harsh illumination that left deep shadows perfect for concealment. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter with the casual competence of men who'd done this work many times before, their weapons visible but not aggressively displayed. But it was the sounds that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind like whispered prayers. The crying of children, muffled conversations in multiple languages, the shuffling of feet on metal floors. Human beings were being held in those containers. And from the variety of sounds, Marcus estimated at least 8 victims, possibly more. Isabella had been listening with the kind of intense concentration that children developed when their survival depended on understanding adult conversations they weren't supposed to hear. Suddenly, she gripped Marcus's sleeve with small fingers that trembled from more than just cold. "That's Carmen crying," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I know that sound. She cried like that when they took a baby away." She paused, tilting her head to catch another fragment of sound. "And that coughing, that's little Diego. He always coughs when he's scared, because he can't breathe right." The confirmation that Isabella recognized specific voices among the victims transformed the tactical situation from rescue operation to personal mission. These weren't anonymous children in need of help. These were people Isabella knew, friends who had shared her captivity, fellow survivors who were still trapped in the nightmare she had escaped. Marcus studied children, smaller figures visible through gaps in the hastily welded ventilation slits, sounds of muffled conversation and occasional crying. The center container held adults, based on the deeper voices and more substantial shadows moving against the illuminated walls. The rightmost container showed signs of being used as an operational headquarters, electrical cables running to generator equipment, satellite communication dishes, and the kind of organized activity that suggested command and control functions. The guards moved in predictable patterns, their routes timed by habit rather than training. Marcus recognized the signs of mercenary work, competent enough to handle routine security, but lacking the discipline and systematic approach of professional soldiers. They were vulnerable to the kind of tactics Marcus had learned in Afghanistan, where patience and precision could neutralize superior numbers. Kaiser had been watching the guards with the focused intensity of a predator, calculating attack angles. When Marcus gave the silent hand signal for assess and hold, the German shepherd immediately shifted into tactical mode, his body going completely still, except for the constant micro-movements of ears and nose, gathering intelligence. Years of combat deployment had created a bond between man and dog that transcended ordinary training. They operated as a single unit, each understanding the other's capabilities and limitations with the kind of precision that kept teams alive in hostile territory. Marcus began his approach, using skills that had kept him alive through 3 tours of duty, moving in short bursts between cover points, staying low to minimize his silhouette, timing his movements to coincide with the guards' patrol patterns. The first sentry never knew what hit him. Marcus emerged from the shadows like a ghost, applying a blood choke that rendered the man unconscious in seconds without making enough noise to alert his partner. Kaiser moved with equal precision, circling wide to approach the second guard from an unexpected angle. When Marcus gave the signal, the German shepherd materialized from the darkness like a nightmare, his presence forcing the guard to turn away from Marcus's position at the exact moment needed for a silent takedown. With the perimeter secured, Marcus approached the first container with Isabella close behind, her small hand gripping his tactical vest as they moved through shadows that seemed to pulse with menace. The sounds from inside were clearer now, children's voices speaking in Spanish and English, adult voices offering quiet comfort, and underneath it all, the unmistakable atmosphere of people living. Instead, he used bolt cutters from his tactical pack, the metal parting with soft snaps that seemed impossibly loud in the frigid silence. The door swung open to reveal a scene that would haunt Marcus's dreams for years to come. Carmen Rodriguez sat on a thin mattress in the corner, holding two children who couldn't be more than 4 and 6 years old, respectively. Her face was gaunt with malnutrition and stress, her clothes dirty and torn, but her eyes blazed with the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending her young. Around the container, 5 other children of various ages huddled together for warmth and comfort, their faces showing the hollow-eyed resignation of people who had given up hope of rescue. "Carmen," Isabella whispered, stepping forward with the red bag clutched against her chest. "It's me, Isabella. We came to take you home." The woman's face crumpled with emotion as recognition dawned. She reached out with trembling hands to touch Isabella's face, as if confirming that the child was real rather than a hallucination born of desperation and despair. "Mija," Carmen breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Rosa said you escaped, but I hoped, but I didn't dare believe." Marcus knelt beside them, his voice gentle but urgent. "We're getting everyone out of here, but we need to move quickly and quietly. Can you walk? Can the children walk?" Carmen nodded, already gathering the younger children with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to emergency situations. "Diego, Ana, we're leaving now. Stay close to me, stay quiet like we practiced." As the group prepared to move, Marcus felt the familiar surge of purpose that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his military service. This was what he'd been trained for. Not the politics of war or the complexities of geopolitical strategy, but the simple, fundamental act of protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. Kaiser had positioned himself at the container entrance, maintaining security while the rescue proceeded. His training and instincts had seamlessly adapted from military operations to child protection. The same skills that had once detected IEDs now focused on ensuring that no threat could reach the vulnerable people under Marcus's protection. But as they prepared to evacuate the first container, the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the night air like a blade. Headlights swept across the shipping yard, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that their window of opportunity was closing faster than anticipated. Vincent Cross had returned to check on his operation, and the final confrontation was about to begin. The black SUV rolled through the shipping yard's entrance with the predatory grace of a shark cruising familiar waters, its headlights cutting stark white swaths through the shadows between containers. His military training screaming warnings about tactical disadvantage and limited escape routes. They were exposed, outnumbered, and caught in the middle of an extraction that had suddenly become exponentially more dangerous. Cross emerged from the vehicle with the confident bearing of a man who had never faced real consequences for his actions, his silver hair gleaming in the harsh security lights as he surveyed the scene with predatory satisfaction. He was accompanied by 2 men who carried themselves with the cold professionalism of career criminals. One tall and lean, with prison tattoos creeping up his neck, the other built like a linebacker and moving with the measured pace of someone accustomed to violence as a business tool. But it was Cross himself who commanded Marcus's attention, not just because of the immediate threat he represented, but because of something familiar in his posture, something that tugged at memories Marcus had thought buried beneath years of civilian life and PTSD therapy. The way Cross held his shoulders, the particular angle of his jaw when he was concentrating, the unconscious habit of adjusting his shirt cuffs, details that belonged to someone Marcus had known in another life, another war. "Well, well," Cross called out, his voice carrying clearly across the frozen concrete. "Marcus Reed, I wondered when you'd figure it out. Always were too smart for your own good, even back in Kandahar." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, unlocking memories he'd spent years trying to suppress. Kandahar province,
2019. Staff Sergeant Vincent Cross, Military Police, assigned to prisoner processing and interrogation support. A man who had seemed competent and professional until the reports started surfacing. Missing evidence, prisoners who disappeared from custody, local nationals who were processed through official channels but never reached their designated facilities. Marcus stepped into the light, positioning himself between Cross and the container where Isabella and the other children waited in terrified silence. Kaiser moved beside him, the German shepherd's hackles rising as he recognized the shift from rescue operation to combat situation. Years of training and shared trauma had created a bond between man and dog that transcended ordinary communication. They operated as a single tactical unit, each understanding their role without the need for verbal commands. "Vincent Cross," Marcus said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone who had faced down armed insurgents in Afghan mountains. "Should have known it was you. Same pattern as Kandahar. Using official authority to prey on people who couldn't fight back." Cross's smile was the practiced expression Marcus remembered from military briefings. All surface charm, hiding something rotten underneath. "You always were too idealistic, Reed. All that talk about protecting innocent civilians, serving something greater than yourself. But you know what I learned over there? Power is the only thing that matters. The ability to take what you want and make other people accept it." The philosophical divide between them had existed even in Afghanistan, but Marcus had been too focused on survival and mission completion to recognize Cross's corruption for what it truly was. Now, surrounded by evidence of systematic child trafficking and human misery, the full scope of Cross's moral bankruptcy was impossible to ignore. "These children aren't enemy combatants," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "They're innocent kids who trusted the wrong person. How do you justify this to yourself? How do you sleep at night knowing what you've done?" Cross actually laughed, a sound devoid of humor that echoed off the steel containers like a death rattle. "Justify? Reed, I'm providing a service. These kids were living in poverty, uncertainty, constant fear of deportation. I place them with families who have resources, who can give them opportunities they never would have had otherwise. I'm improving their lives." The twisted logic was delivered with the same tone Cross had once used to explain prisoner processing procedures, as if systematic abuse could be transformed into humanitarian work through creative interpretation. Marcus had seen this kind of rationalization before, the way predators convinced themselves that their victims were somehow benefiting from their exploitation. But the sound of Cross's voice had triggered a reaction from inside the container. Isabella emerged from the shadows with the red bag clutched against her chest, her blue eyes blazing with a fury that seemed impossible for someone her age. "You're lying," she said, her clear voice cutting through the adult conversation like a blade. "You don't help children find better homes. You take children away from their mamas and make them cry at night and tell them nobody loves them anymore." Cross's attention shifted to Isabella with the predatory focus of someone spotting valuable merchandise. "Ah, the little survivor. I've been looking for you, Isabella Martinez. You caused quite a disruption when you disappeared." The casual way he spoke her name, as if she were inventory rather than a human being, triggered something primal in Marcus's chest. The careful restraint he'd maintained throughout his military career, the professional detachment that had allowed him to function in combat zones, suddenly evaporated like morning mist. Marcus moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years training for close-quarters combat, closing the distance between himself and Cross before the older man could react. But Cross wasn't just a predator who relied on authority and intimidation. He was also a former soldier with his own combat experience,
and he met Marcus's attack with practiced efficiency. The fight was brutal and immediate, both men drawing on training, but was now being used for fundamentally different purposes. Cross fought with the desperate fury of someone who had everything to lose, using every dirty trick he'd learned in Afghanistan and prison yards. Marcus fought with the cold precision of someone protecting innocent lives, his movements economical and devastating. They crashed into shipping containers and over scattered equipment, trading blows that would have disabled civilian opponents, but barely slowed two men conditioned by military service and hardened by trauma. Cross produced a tactical knife from his boot, slashing at Marcus with the kind of desperate aggression that spoke of cornered animals and final stands. But Kaiser had been watching the fight with the patient intensity of a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When Cross's attention was fully focused on Marcus, when his guard was down and his weapons committed to offensive action, the German Shepherd moved with the lightning precision that had once saved lives in Afghan IED fields. Kaiser's attack was surgical rather than savage, teeth finding the pressure point on Cross's wrist that forced him to drop the knife, powerful jaws applying just enough force to subdue without killing. The dog had been trained to neutralize threats, not to execute them, and even in the heat of combat, he maintained the discipline that had made him an effective military working animal. Cross collapsed with Kaiser's weight pinning him to the frozen concrete, his weapons scattered and his tactical advantage neutralized by 80 pounds of German Shepherd, who had been bred and trained for exactly this kind of situation. The fight was over, but the sound of approaching sirens indicated that the larger operation was just reaching its climax. Isabella had used the distraction of the adult confrontation to help the other children escape from their container prison, leading them toward the extraction point with the kind of natural leadership that reminded Marcus powerfully of her mother's voice on that final recording. She moved among the rescued children like a tiny general, offering comfort to those who were crying, sharing treasures from her red bag with those who needed tangible reminders of safety and love. "It's okay," she told a little boy who was sobbing with relief and residual fear. "These are the good people Mama told me about. They came to take us home." Marcus looked at Isabella, directing the rescue with calm efficiency, at Kaiser maintaining security over their subdued enemy, at the approaching vehicles that carried legitimate law enforcement officers who would finally hold Vincent Cross accountable for his crimes. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Marcus Reed felt like he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The war for Isabella's future, and the futures of countless other children, was finally turning in favor of the innocent. Dawn broke over the shipping yard, like a promise fulfilled, painting the industrial wasteland in shades of gold and crimson that transformed the scene of horror into something that resembled hope. The harsh security lights that had illuminated Vincent Cross's operation were now supplemented by the rotating beacons of police cruisers, ambulances, and federal law enforcement vehicles that had converged on the location like antibodies responding to an infection. Marcus stood beside one of the ambulances, watching paramedics examine Isabella and the 7 other children who had been liberated from Cross's containers. The medical teams worked with the gentle efficiency of professionals who understood that physical injuries were only part of the healing these children would need. Social workers moved among the group, speaking in multiple languages, beginning the delicate process of family reunification and trauma counseling that would continue for months or years to come. Isabella had appointed herself as an unofficial coordinator for the rescued children, moving among them with the red bag slung over her shoulder like a diplomatic pouch. She shared treasures from her collection. The teddy bear named Protector went to a little girl who couldn't stop shivering.
The hand-carved cross was offered to Diego as a reminder that someone had been listening to his prayers. And Rosa's wedding ring was shown to each child as proof that love could survive even when families were separated. "The doctors say everyone is going to be okay," Dr. Mitchell reported, approaching Marcus with a clipboard full of medical evaluations and case notes. Malnutrition, dehydration, psychological trauma, but nothing that can't be treated with time and proper care. "You did it, Marcus. You actually did it." Kaiser lay in a patch of morning sunlight beside the ambulance, his German Shepherd coat gleaming as various law enforcement officers stopped to offer praise and treats. The dog's tail was wagging for the first time since Marcus could remember, a steady rhythm that spoke of satisfaction and purpose fulfilled. Detective Sarah Chen had already submitted paperwork recommending Kaiser for official recognition as a therapy animal, noting his crucial role in both the investigation and the rescue operation. The defense tried to paint Marcus as unstable, dwelling on his PTSD. Davidson pressed, "Sergeant Reed, isn't it true you've suffered flashbacks, nightmares, episodes that impair your judgment?" Marcus didn't flinch. "Yes. I've carried scars from Afghanistan, but those scars don't cloud my judgment. They sharpen it. They taught me how to protect others, no matter the cost." The jury leaned forward, listening not to a broken man, but to a soldier who had repurposed his wounds into vigilance. Prosecutor Chen shifted the focus back. "Sergeant Reed, the night you found Isabella, why did you stop?" Marcus glanced at Isabella, who was stroking Kaiser's fur on the witness stand. "Because she was a child, alone in the snow. Because leaving her there wasn't an option. My training, my demons, my past, it all led to that moment, and I'd do it again." Silence hung. Even Judge Holmes seemed moved. When Vincent Cross was finally called, his polished facade cracked. Confronted with meticulous records, photographs, and testimonies, he tried charm, then denial, then rage. But the evidence, his own hubris, buried him. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, guilty on all counts. As the verdict was read, Isabella reached for Marcus's hand. Kaiser pressed close. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a war had ended not in rubble, but in redemption. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with townspeople. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, but the only words that mattered came from Isabella, whispered as she looked up at him. "We won, Papa." Marcus's throat tightened. He lifted her into his arms, the red bag at her side with quiet dignity. Marcus stood tall in dress uniform. Kaiser wore a ribbon that read official family member. "Do you understand what adoption means?" the judge asked gently. "It means we get to be a real family forever," Isabella replied. "It means Marcus and Kaiser and I are connected because we choose to love each other." "And what name would you like?" "Isabella Martinez Reed," she said firmly. "Martinez is my mama's name. I never want to forget her. Reed is my new family. I want to belong to both." The papers were signed. Applause shook the room. The nightmare ended in a new beginning. That evening, their mantel displayed a portrait. Marcus in uniform, Isabella smiling, Kaiser at attention with his ribbon. The red bag sat on her shelf, no longer clutched in desperation, but holding treasures: Rosa's ring, Marcus's dog tags, a pressed flower from their first family walk. Isabella handed Marcus a drawing, 3 figures before a house labeled home, a man, a girl, and a dog with a cape marked Kaiser the Hero Dog. "This is us," she said. "We're heroes because we saved each other." Marcus pulled her close. "Yes, sweetheart, this is our family. And we'll be heroes together for a very long time." The cottage on the bluff above the Atlantic felt like a jewel Marcus had never dared imagine during lonely nights overseas. Its cedar shingles gleamed silver in the salt air, the porch catching sunrise and sunset. On moving day, Isabella commanded like a queen. "The big couch goes by the window so we can see the water," she instructed, "and the rocking chair goes in the corner so Marcus can read and Kaiser can lie beside us." The red bag, once a desperate lifeline, became an heirloom. She set it on the stone mantel where afternoon light kissed its fabric. Kaiser mapped the property with a soldier's precision, but it was the porch that won his heart, a vantage point for both driveway and sea. A dog trained for war now found a new adversary in the tide, one to admire rather than fight. For Marcus, the ocean's rhythm became medicine. Flashbacks loosened their grip. The waves carried him into sleep. His office walls filled with photos of rescued children, and in the corner burned a candle shrine beside a photo of the night he carried Isabella to safety. Isabella's room bloomed with reclamation. Blue walls like her eyes, clouds painted across the ceiling, shelves heavy with books and toys. From her bed she could see Marcus's door, Kaiser's post, and the ocean beyond, 3 sentinels guarding her dreams. Mornings brought beach walks. Isabella filled jars with shells, catalogued like a scholar. Kaiser leapt at waves, growling at foam. Isabella's age. Watching Isabella and Kaiser bent over tide pools, she told Marcus, "That little girl has seen too much, but she has the kind of strength that comes from being loved. You'll do just fine here." September brought kindergarten. Isabella sat at breakfast, red bag at her side, plate untouched. Kaiser paced the doorway, as vigilant as Marcus himself. At Millbrook Elementary, Miss Sarah Williams, a teacher trained in trauma-informed education, greeted them. Her classroom glowed with soft lighting, quiet corners, books about resilience. She had even fought for Kaiser's bed beside Isabella's desk. Still, old habits surfaced. Isabella clutching the bag, scanning exits, studying faces. Miss Williams didn't push. She let her find her way. The breakthrough came when a boy named Tommy lost his pencil and burst into tears. Isabella approached with quiet steadiness. "When I lose important things, I get scared too," she said. "But sometimes they're just hiding where we haven't looked yet." She organized a search, rallied classmates, and found the pencil. Tommy's smile lit the room. So did hers. That night, Miss Williams told Marcus, "She's remarkable. Trauma didn't break her. It taught her how to see others. Her empathy is her strength." At home, her progress astonished him. Reading near second-grade level, math sharp, drawings shifting from dark chaos to bright families and protective animals. One evening, she defined courage. It means being scared but doing the right thing anyway. Like when you found me in the snow. Or when I told the judge about the cold hands man. Or when Kaiser protects us, even if he's scared too. She gave lessons to Kaiser as well. Paw shakes, rolling over, playful tricks. The soldier dog was learning joy. By November, the rumble of the mail truck had become ritual. Kaiser bounded off the porch, Isabella running after. Most days brought only bills or ads. But one gray afternoon, she burst into Marcus's office with a thick envelope clutched to her chest. "Marcus, it's for me. From San Antonio, Texas, C. Santos." The name struck him hard. Carmen Santos, Rosa's mother. They sat together on the couch, Kaiser pressed close, as Isabella carefully opened the letter. It was written in Spanish and English, alternating like breath. Isabella, determined, began translating. "Querida Isabella, my name is Carmen Santos, but everyone calls me Abuela Carmen. I am your mama's mama, your grandmother. For 3 years I have searched for you and Rosa, praying you were safe." The words landed like revelation. Isabella had family, blood family, who had never stopped looking. The letter told of Rosa's flight from an abusive partner.
"Carmen, she has eyes like mine. I think I remember her voice. She sang songs in Spanish that made me sleepy." The letter ended gently. "If you would like me to visit, or if you want to visit me, I would be so happy. I understand if you need time. The most important thing is that you are safe and loved." Isabella's face shone with both excitement and uncertainty. "Marcus, can we call her? Just to hear her voice?" He drew her close. "Of course. We'll take our time. We'll do this together." With deliberate hands, Isabella opened the red bag and lifted Rosa's wedding ring into the light. "I want to tell Abuela Carmen about Mama's ring," she said, "so she knows I kept everything safe. And I want to tell her about you and Kaiser, about how we chose to be a family." That evening, as the phone rang in a small San Antonio home where an elderly woman had prayed for 3 years, Marcus felt the world shift. Their family was about to expand, not through courts or documents, but through love that had survived distance, silence, and fear. Outside, the Atlantic roared. Tonight its rhythm sounded like a song in Spanish, carrying voices across time to remind them that some bonds could never be broken. The Millbrook Community Festival had long marked harvest's end, but this year it felt transformed. Now it stood as tribute to local heroes, with proceeds directed to trauma counseling and victim services after the town's confrontation with Cross's crimes. 5-year-old Isabella was its heart. With surprising authority, she directed other children decorating the square. "Purple goes with yellow, not red," she insisted. Her handmade signs proclaimed, "Heroes live among us," and "Community protects children." Childish letters, profound truths. Kaiser, once a war dog, now trained daily for demonstrations, searches, therapy techniques, comfort exercises. He wagged his tail when he found Isabella in practice searches, joy replacing the grim efficiency of his old life. Marcus prepared the keynote. He labored over every word until it carried the simplicity of conviction. Healing isn't something that happens to you. Healing is something you choose, often by helping others find safety and hope. Community doesn't just support healing. Community is healing. As the square filled with banners, booths, and music, Marcus felt the weight of the day. His daughter would speak. His dog would demonstrate. And together, they would show that survival could become service. And service could turn a wounded town into a community strong. Banners, booths, and the smells of cupcakes donated by local businesses. The mayor opened with words that framed the day as a celebration of ordinary people who chose extraordinary courage. When Isabella stepped to the podium in her blue dress, the sand dollar in her pocket, and her red bag now a small purse, the crowd hushed. "I thought courage meant not crying when scary things happened," she said, her voice steady. "But real courage means crying when you need to, asking for help, and then helping others when they need it. Heroes don't always look like storybooks. Sometimes they have fur and 4 legs. Sometimes heroes are people like Marcus, who stop their trucks in blizzards because they hear dogs barking. Silence deepened into awe. Then, with childlike solemnity, Isabella looped a clay medal around Kaiser's neck. Painted gold, inscribed, "Hero Dog." "You're not just our dog," she declared. "You're everybody's protector dog." The German shepherd offered his paw, and the crowd erupted. Marcus, unaware, received his own plaque for civilian heroism. Dr. Mitchell's words nearly undid him. Marcus took the skills of war and turned them into protection for children. That's not just heroism. That's healing. Kaiser demonstrated his therapy work, yet the moment that lingered came when a toddler cried. The dog lowered himself, utterly still, until tiny hands clutched his fur and the tears stopped. No explanation was needed. The square understood. That evening, totals were announced. $50,000 raised. Isabella closed with a spontaneous truth. The most important job is taking care of each other. The ovation shook the town. Driving home, Isabella clutched her $100. Kaiser wore his medal with soldierly pride, and Marcus felt gratitude more profound than any headline or total. At the cottage, lamplight warmed the mantel where the red bag rested. No longer a survival kit, but a family relic. Bedtime rituals unfolded, unpacking treasures, telling stories. Isabella showed her mother's ring. "It caught the light when I spoke. I think Mama was telling me she was proud. And now," she added, placing the $100 beside it, "we have ocean magic too." Later, she pulled out a new treasure, a notebook filled with letters to kids who are scared like I was. Marcus's hands trembled as he read. "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're paying attention. Good people are looking for you, even when you can't see them yet." Heritage returned in waves. Most striking was Carmen's embrace of Marcus. "You didn't just save her life, you saved her soul. You are my son too." Even Kaiser passed her inspection, solemnly offering his paw as if joining the family guard. Before leaving, Carmen gave Isabella a wooden cross carved by Diego. She placed it in the red bag beside Rosa's ring. "That is armor nothing can break," Carmen told her. The circle of family had widened. By January, the Millbrook Therapy Dog Program launched. Kaiser wore his vest with dignity. Marcus trained as his handler. Isabella, unusually young, was permitted as a peer counselor. Their first patient, Tommy, hadn't spoken since his parents' death. Sitting by his bed, Isabella said gently, "Kaiser once had nightmares too." On the third visit, Tommy reached for the dog and whispered, "I miss my mommy." From then on, Kaiser became a star. Children facing chemo, abuse survivors, mute trauma victims, each found courage with him. Isabella's instincts amazed professionals. Marcus began training veterans to work with rescue dogs, teaching them that protecting the vulnerable was a mission as real as combat. Stories multiplied. Sarah, once mute, began to speak. Michael braved chemo for the reward of stroking Kaiser. Maine awarded the program for innovation, and by spring, 5 certified teams served statewide. On the blizzard anniversary, Isabella placed flowers on Rosa's grave. "Mama," she said, "Tommy talks again. Sarah isn't afraid anymore. Michael takes his medicine bravely. I think you'd be proud I'm using what you taught me. To be strong for others." The red bag now held Rosa's ring, Diego's cross, Marcus's dog tags, therapy certificates, and letters from grateful families. It no longer spoke of survival alone, but of service.
That night, Isabella announced, "I want to be a doctor who fixes broken feelings." Marcus felt the promise fulfilled. The frozen child was not only safe, but thriving. Kindergarten marked another milestone. Her teacher, Jennifer Park, had prepared a trauma-informed classroom and a quiet space for Kaiser. On the first day, Isabella comforted a boy who lost his pencil. Important things aren't gone, they're just hiding. Later, she explained to classmates, "Love isn't like toys, it's like sunshine. There's always enough." Kaiser's classroom visits became highlights, showing children how healing could come with fur and patience. Isabella emerged as a leader, proving that even at 5, survivors could guide others. 2 years after Cross's conviction, Marcus became director of victim advocacy services. His office walls bore letters from families and maps of programs inspired by Isabella and Kaiser. On his desk, family thrived.
Kaiser, now older, eased into semi-retirement, still working part-time, but also napping on porches and walking beaches. Isabella's advocacy grew. At conferences, she told professionals, "Children remember everything, especially the scary things. What we need is for adults to listen and believe us." She became living proof of post-traumatic growth. Marcus began a memoir, proceeds pledged to victim services. Millbrook itself transformed into a model of trauma-informed care. At 7, Isabella proposed donating the red bag to the Maine Children's Museum. "It kept me safe when I had nobody. Now other children need to know that surviving scary things is possible." The ceremony drew crowds. Isabella, in an autumn leaf dress, told them, "This bag held my mama's love when she couldn't hold me. Now it will hold hope for other children." The exhibit displayed Rose's ring, Diego's cross, Marcus's dog tags, and audio of Isabella's voice explaining resilience. Kaiser's legacy grew too. A bronze statue in Millbrook Square. Plaque reading, "In honor of Kaiser and all therapy animals who bridge the gap between trauma and healing." The statue became a pilgrimage site for families and veterans. Their stories sparked Survivors and Heroes Day, an annual event bringing together survivors and professionals, raising funds and weaving networks of resilience. At 12, Isabella testified before Congress, broadcast nationwide. Kaiser, now 13 and graying, lay at her side. Marcus and Elena watched from the gallery. Miguel, now in college, came to cheer her on. She urged lawmakers to believe children, to strengthen protections, to understand that trauma survivors could grow into leaders. By then, the red bag had reached the Smithsonian, part of a permanent exhibit on resilience. Marcus served as assistant director of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Elena as chief of pediatrics at Maine Medical. Miguel volunteered with therapy dogs. Their family had become a living model of how survival turns into service. Every December, they still brought flowers to Rose's grave. Isabella updated her with news. Children helped, laws changed, courage shared. At home, she once announced her future: child psychology and social work. "I want to help scared kids believe good people really are looking for them." Marcus looked at her, not just his daughter by law, but his teacher in transforming pain into purpose, and felt again the surge of gratitude that had become his daily companion. Outside, the Atlantic whispered its eternal rhythm. The red bag was gone from their mantle, but its spirit lived on, in therapy programs across the nation, in Kaiser's statue, in Isabella's advocacy. Children who needed to know that good people really do come when you need them most. This story reminds us of something profound: the unbreakable bond between humans and the dogs who choose to love us unconditionally.
Kaiser wasn't just Isabella's protector. He was living proof that German Shepherds possess an almost mystical ability to sense when we need them most. They don't just guard our homes, they guard our hearts. In Marcus and Isabella's darkest moments, it was Kaiser's unwavering loyalty that helped them remember what love looked like. He showed them that healing doesn't always come from words or medicine. Sometimes it comes from warm fur against your cheek and amber eyes that see straight into your soul. If you have a German Shepherd or any dog who's touched your life the way Kaiser touched theirs, you understand this connection runs deeper than training or commands. It's spiritual. It's transformative. I've discovered something that's helped me strengthen that sacred bond with my own dog, a gentle approach that honors the intelligence and heart of these remarkable animals. If you'd like to explore what I've learned, I'd be happy to share it with you. Sometimes the smallest insights create the most beautiful changes in how we connect with our four-legged family members. Your dog is already perfect. Maybe we just need to listen better.